Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the JAX Chamber webinar series. This is our fifth installment. Today, we are going to be talking about kind of the economic impact of COVID-19, sort of what we've seen so far and what we're looking at going forward. We have two experts with us today that are going to give brief presentations, and then, for about the first half hour, and then we'll open up the last half for your questions as we have on all these. So please submit questions through the thing on the right side of your screen, and we'll get to as many as we can. Today we have Dr. Albert Lowe. He is the chair of the Department of Economics and Geography at the Coggin College of Business at UNF. Dr. Lowe, thanks so much for joining us. And we have Moore Hallmark, who is the Vice President of Regional Affairs in the Office of Congressional and Public Policy or Public Affairs with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And Moore is based in Atlanta. There's a lot of work in the Southeast. So thank you guys very much for being here. What we're going to do, like I said, they're each going to talk real quick, give presentations on sort of how they're seeing things and what the outlook is going forward. And then again, we will get to your questions. So we'll kick it off with Dr. Lowe. Dr. Lowe, go ahead. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. What I'm going to do today with the first 15 minutes is I'm going to quickly give you a summary of how this COVID-19 crisis turned into an economic crisis, and briefly summarize, some of the government relief funds and policies. And more importantly, I think everybody is interested in knowing, any projection that economists may have. So I will briefly how this recovery may look like, and then I probably would just give a quick comment on what are the challenges I see from an economist's perspective, that business will be facing. Right. So the first thing I want to talk about is the economic crisis. I think in January and February of this year, we had almost a perfect start of our economy, and everything is going so well. Our economy is in full employment, and then all of a sudden we are running into this COVID-19 crisis. So I think that there are the economic crisis. You may think of it stemming from this social distancing policies, stay-at-home orders, those kind of containment measures that are put into place to prevent the spread of the virus. This actually can be considered into an economic crisis that are revealing itself in several phases. The first phase is usually the supply side phase. You can see that there's disruption from social distancing because certain businesses are much more vulnerable to the social distancing and other containment measures. So we're looking at restaurants, accommodation, leisure, and entertainment sectors. They are closing down, and they are letting people go. And then at the same time, you have a lot of sectors such as manufacturing, retail, trade, or food sectors. They are suffering from this global supply chain interruption. Because if you are suppliers in China, they are locking down, and they do not let export, do not let goods and services out. And then you will not have the supply you will need to produce your output. So everything pretty much started from this supply side force, and then it will turn into a demand side force, because when people are losing their job, losing their incomes, that will weaken their consumption ability. And so and then people are trying to get rid of the purchase of or delay the purchase of non-essential, and with that you start to see that there will be much less sales in retail and wholesale, production and consumer goods. Even business services such as finance and insurance will also suffer from that second phase of the impact, which is the demand side impact. There are businesses that may be able to thrive on this. So for example, businesses that are relying on IT services, they may do much better, and businesses that are focusing on telecommunication, for example, Zoom, or GoToMeetings, they can also benefit. And healthcare is a mixed bag because on the one hand you see that there's a huge demand in hospital services, but then you also hear about the dental offices and physician offices. They are closing down, or they are reducing their services to only urgent cares. So they're also letting a lot of people go. So healthcare, I think in the long run will still be strong, but temporarily you also see a lot of the uh, job losses in that sector. All right, so now in terms of the current economic condition, so unemployment rate, so the March figure has just been released. All the national data has been released a while ago, but the local data for Florida and for Jacksonville metropolitan statistical area, they just released last Friday. And I made some comments in the daily records about this. So basically, if you compare February and March, so national data, unemployment rate rose from 3.5% to 4.4%. That's the largest over the month jump in unemployment rate for more than 30, 40 years. And then for Florida, we are seeing the unemployment rate jump from 2.8% to 4.3%. For Jacksonville metropolitan statistical area, which covers the 5-county region, the unemployment rate also jumped from 3% to 4.3%. Right, and these jumps are still really, really big. We are not seeing this kind of over the month jump in the local area for a long time. However, even this jump is still probably understating the true economic pain a lot of people are feeling, because unemployment rate is not really including furloughed workers, or people who are on reduced hours. So those kind of impact is not really picked up by unemployment rate. So the actual economic pain is much more severe. In terms of sectors, just like the national level, we see a lot of the job losses in the food and drink section, accommodation, healthcare, child daycare, business services, and retail trade. So the impact is pretty widespread. And in terms of consumer confidences, it is also dropping significantly. So for the national level, I think the conference board, they published something called Consumer Confidence Index, which they see a huge drop in the national level, almost across the region, except for maybe New England area. That's not really showing up yet, but probably will show up next month. For Florida, there is something published by University of Florida, which is called Consumer Sentiment Index, which also demonstrates this significant drop in consumer confidence. So this is also a big blow to our economy. Now, the government has been trying to do a lot of things, and I think they're right in doing that. And first, you have the CARES Act. This is called Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which has a lot of components. So for example, mobilize the National Guard and provide some relief funding for state and local government. This direct cash payment to individual to support consumer spending, and then there's lending to small businesses. So that is the $2 trillion relief we're talking about. And then there's a Federal Reserve Bank, who announced up to 2.3 trillion of loan to support liquidity and credit flow for small businesses. That's also very helpful. And Congress just a day ago passed another $500 billion just to help small businesses and the expansion of our testing capacity. So there are a lot of things that we're trying to do, but I would think that most of what these mitigating policies are trying to achieve is really just bridge financing. Remember the two phases I was talking about. The first phase, which is on the supply side, that's nothing that you can recover, because if you have the business closed down, shutting down their operation, and a lot of them, you will never be able to get back this lost demand. For example, restaurants, entertainment, the lost profit is lost forever. unlike manufacturing, you may still be able to have pent-up demand, and you will be able to fulfill those demands at a later point when the economy open up. So this is not really intended to help the supply, alleviate the supply side impact. It's more about bridge the finance for consumers to kind of delay the demand side effect. Because if you think about it, the paycheck stopped for most people, and they will not be able to pay the rent. They will not be able to purchase the groceries. With this direct cash payment or the paycheck protection programs, still help them to have some level of income. Which will allow them to continue with their consumption. So that's really trying to mitigating the second phase of the impact. And now let me talk about the possible shape of the economic recovery. So from past experience, we know that when all else being equal, the longer the recession, the deeper the recession, the longer it would take for the economy to dig itself out of it. So it would take a long time for us to recover, the longer the recession we are in. So the stimulus apparently will be able to shorten this recession and will help achieve a faster recovery. But economists have, there are a lot of debates about the shape of the recovery. So we hear a lot of alphabets, things like V-shaped recovery, which means that you have a very speedy recovery as soon as the economy open up. Or U-shaped recovery, which means that you will have somewhat of a delay, but eventually it's going to come back quickly. More pessimistic is the L-shaped recovery. So this horizontal section just indicate that you may have a long period of time that the economy will kind of be in stationary and not really growing much, until much later point. And then there's also the W shape, which is based on the assumption that you may have a resurgence of the virus spread, and therefore the economy has to close down again. So there are many different shapes that are possible. I'm not going to dismiss any possibility here. I think the conference board about a few weeks ago, they published projections that some of their economists made. And so some of them are already outdated because we know that didn't happen as time goes on. The most optimistic projections, based on what they are showing, is that we may have a possible summertime V-shaped recovery. This is based on the assumption that the virus spread has peaked, and then we'll be able to reopen the economy in May, which is still possible. And then they think that the return will be relatively fast-paced. However, it seemed like by the end of the year, we are still looking at a 5.5% drop in the GDP, index, compared to the normal level, say 100, and so you will still have quite a while to get to full recovery. So as I said earlier, I think that the longer the recession, the longer the recovery would take. So Matt, in our earlier conversation, he mentioned about the possibility of having a comparison with this financial crisis 10 years ago. As you know, that in that financial crisis, what we are seeing is there are a lot of similarity. It is a widespread financial crisis, and a lot of families and households were hurt. So people are really just, they are paying down their debt, and they will not be able to have enough, financial resources to consume, to save, and which is pretty similar to what we are seeing now in that regard, in this current crisis. So, if you want to make a contrast with that one, so I think that the 2008 financial crisis, the crisis itself, by official definition, lasted for about a year and a half. And looking at the data, it took us another 2 years or so to stabilize, and then another 8 years or so to fully recover. Meaning, GDP go back or unemployment rate go back to the pre-recession level. And so if you think about this, the length of the recovery, and but since now we are looking at a shorter term recession, hopefully, and then so the recovery will be also shorter than that one, but I will still think that it will take at least a year and a half for us to get back to where we were. And so we cannot be very optimistic about the recovery, because I think although there are businesses that have pent-up demand, you expect a rapid recovery for some of them, but for many reasons, you have a lot of sectors that may see a much slower recovery. For example, consumers may still be wary about getting infected, and traveler restaurant goers, they may not necessarily go back to their pre-recession activity right away. And then you also have sectors, whose supply chain got disrupted, and they still need to figure out how to put their production pieces back together, and or figure out a new supplier. So all of this is going to take more time. So I think the recovery will not be really a V-shape, but kind of an Nike swoosh, so if you will. You have a huge drop, then your recovery is going to be with a much smaller slope, if you will. All right, so I think that in the short run, business certainly have to figure out how to put their production process back together, and then relearn about their customers, whose financial ability and their confidence are considerably weakened during this time. So it would take a while for them to recover. And the other challenge business is facing is, once we reopen the economy, you probably not be able to go back to this normal situation you had before the recession. At a very minimum, you probably need to figure out, how would I be able to still communicate with a lot of my customers without that face-to-face interaction? How do I configure my store? For example, at Costco, at Publix, if you go to, they all reconfigure their shelves and then their line of movement, so to make sure that there is still some kind of distancing. Manufacturing, you probably need to figure out how to produce, by having some distance between workers. And so that is something very important. Business, we need to figure out how to incorporate this technology, the digital services, into their old operations. So they want to be able to still convince their customers to come back to them. So they also need to make sure that they are mitigating a lot of the safety concerns consumers may have. And finding suppliers. If you are really hurt in this supply chain disruption globally, then I think it would be reasonable for business to think about, should I be only sourcing from one country? For example, China, or some other country this time that were hurt, especially for extended period of time, such as Italy. So I probably need to diversify my supplier profile, and that should become the top priority for a lot of businesses, and especially one that are heavily relying on global supply chain. All right, so I think I probably ran over a couple of minutes. I'm sorry more, so I don't mean to, but so let me stop here.
Not at all, Dr. Lowe. Thank you very much. And Matt, thank you, and the Jacksonville Chamber for the opportunity to join you and your members today. We appreciate your leadership to the chamber profession and the community down there, certainly during these difficult and unprecedented times. Dr. Lowe touched on a number of things, mentioning obviously the CARES Act, and I certainly won't get into that. Just a quick update, as you all may know, or I suspect the monies, particularly those impacting businesses and the loan opportunities for them, ran out. That being in the Paycheck Protection Program loan program and the EIDL loans through the small business. The Senate yesterday passed an additional $310 billion to go into the Paycheck Protection Program. 10 billion increase for the idle grants and 50 billion in support idle loans. A 75 billion increase to reimburse hospitals and healthcare providers, and then 25 billion in COVID-19 testing. The House is set to vote on that sometime this afternoon. I was kind of checking as we were on the call to see if that had happened yet. I had not seen that, but that's just to say that's kind of the latest on where Congress is right now. They're expected to come back into session next month, and we'll begin and are already beginning work on a phase 4, and we'll keep you up to date as we go forward with that. But as far as today, I want to kind of talk a little bit about what we're talking about right now, a lot of it, and that is what does it look like for businesses to go back to work? Everybody's talking about it. Governors are talking about it. What's workable as a feasible time to go back? Trying to measure economic distress and disruption, as Dr. Lowe talked about, but also human and health risk and stuff. And so it's a tough task that they're going through. While everybody's talking about it, it's important to remember and recognize that there are a lot of people that never stopped working in the first place. They've risked their personal health to keep everyone else safe through this time. And so for those on the call, we commend you and we thank you for your efforts and to continue your work and provide the services that you're doing through this time for everyone. Now, a few weeks ago, the U.S. Chamber launched a new Path Forward program, working with national leaders and our members on a national conversation to talk about return to work and what that might look like. Let me be clear from the very get-go, and at this point, we don't have all the answers. Heck, we don't even have all the questions. But we're working with members of Congress and our members and others, and using these opportunities like today to hear from you as to what are some of the things that we need to be looking at collectively as a business community and talking about to our elected officials in Washington and local and state governments as well. While there are lots of questions and uncertainty, there is increasing certainly around the reopening that returning to work will be very gradual. It'll be phased in, and it'll be will vary based on factors such as location, sector, business type, the size, the health status of their workers. Will also require continued social distancing for a while, expanded use of personal protection equipment, and other countermeasures as well. To help businesses and government anticipate these challenges, we've begun exploring and cataloging some of these major implications of returning to work in this environment, ranging from workplace safety and employees' rights to liability concerns and continued revenue disruptions. We've kind of boiled it down into 3 areas of focus: essential services and resources, resolution of regulatory and legal liability issues, and support for businesses and individuals. First, with regards to essential services and resources, bringing employees back to work and reopening commerce will require that certain essential services and resources are in place, such as general health screening. Right now, the CDC has recommended that critical infrastructure employees screen certain exposed employees for temperature, ideally before they enter a facility. If these recommendations are expanded to cover all employers and employees and potential customers, then employers will have to acquire temperature checking equipment and develop processes for screening individuals. Early and federal consistent guidelines to this will help and will be needed to expand this because it's going to take time to acquire the equipment and establish proper protocols. When you're testing COVID-19 stuff, to the extent that return to work is based on testing of employees either who have the virus or maybe the antibodies, there will have to be sufficient testing capabilities as well as clear resolution on who is responsible for administering those tests and paying for those tests and checking the test results. For most employers, they're not well positioned to administer these type of medical tests, so there's going to need to be a wide acceptability of third-party providers probably. There will also be a need for standardization as to when employees need to be tested, the frequency of testing, as well as the documentation employees will provide to their employers. This frequent testing is likely to be very expensive, and it should be determined who will bear the cost of that as well. There's also the issue of personal protective equipment, PPEs. If public health professionals recommend widespread use of PPEs like masks, it will require clarity as to what is needed and who is responsible for providing that equipment. The CDC has said thus far that employers can issue face masks or can allow employees supplying their own face mask if there's a shortage of those masks. However, the purpose of these masks should be made very clear, as many are not tested or for protecting the wearer. And employers asking employees to wear them should not have to be held liable if an employee does come down with a virus while wearing one of these masks. Another issue of thought is transportation. Right now, approximately 8 million Americans rely on public transportation to get to work each and every day. Public transportation is most effective, as you know, when it maximizes density, which needs to be avoided if we're going to continue to preserve social distancing through a period of time. So staggering work times can help spread out the rush hour, but transit systems will likely need to operate at what would normally be excess capacity in order to support public health, and will likely require some form of financial assistance in support of a safe return to work. And then, of course, you have childcare. Many childcare providers are still operating, but only caring for the children of essential workers. In order to allow other parents to return to work, childcare providers will need to presumably operate under suboptimal financial conditions, since not all employers or all employees will return to work at once. And with increased cost of maintaining social distancing and accommodate staggered work times, childcare providers will likely require some form of temporary financial assistance as well. Another big issue, and this is probably one of the biggest that a lot of employers are thinking about already, and that is the regulatory and legal liability issues. A reopening plan that is medically based and relies on social distancing and other best practices for public health may raise significant regulatory and legal liability risk. There are already numerous lawsuits already being filed as a result of COVID-19, and litigation risk that will become worse during the reopening could include areas such as healthcare. Already federal and some state laws already are designed to maximize the health privacy of individuals. However, this objective could conflict with potential reopening requirements for employers to verify employees' COVID-19 status and or their vulnerability due to underlying health conditions. During this emergency and recovery period, employers will need a broad safety harbor to make necessary inquiries regarding the health status and to make certain limited disclosures to prevent the spread of the disease. There will also be the concern for, and there already are, the concern for discrimination claims. Employers who conduct medically based and risk-based reopenings using factors such as age or underlying health conditions may face liability under existing anti-discrimination laws. In addition, employers could face claims of adverse employment actions by employees who are delayed in returning to work or who feel they aren't being provided other reasonable accommodations at work. And at the same time, employers could face liability if they return at-risk employees to work too soon. So there needs to be a clear guidance about what practices are acceptable in conducting a medically based and risk-based reopening, and provide a safe harbor for actions taken by employers consistent with those guidelines. There's also the safe workplace requirements. Generally, when maintaining a safe workplace requires the use of personal protective equipment, such as masks or respirators or other physical barriers, OSHA requires employers to be responsible for ensuring the availability of such equipment and the training of that equipment for all their employees. OSHA has just come out with kind of their response workplace safety exposure guidelines. We've now put together a summary of that report and have posted it on our website. I've shared it also with chambers around the region, but they address three main questions for employers. How should employers protect their employees? Do employers have to record cases of COVID-19 on their injury logs? And how will OSHA conduct enforcement related to the coronavirus? I sent that summary to Matt before this call, and so he can share it with you after the call if you wish. But those are just a few of the other issues as well. There's also the issue of supporting independent contractors. There are more than 23 million Americans who are independent contractors in various fields. Businesses want to be able to continue providing the same type of workplace protections for independent contractors as they do their own employees. However, doing so could be used as an argument that the individual has ceased to be an independent contractor and is instead an employee. Congress should settle this tension by creating a safe harbor that would allow businesses to implement health practices and provide benefits, including PPE, without establishing a formal employment relationship for the duration of the COVID-19 return to work transition period. With employee practices, employers already are facing litigation regarding employment practices related to the pandemic. They could also face liability around wage and hour issues. For example, are employees compensated while they're getting tested or passing through screening? Leave policies and travel restrictions, teleworking protocol, and other workers' compensation. In addition, employers could be at risk for legal action if they do not accommodate employees who either insist on returning to work even though they have not completed health screening or are high risk, or those who refuse to work and provide adequate support for the refusal of their work, or refusal for even coming back to work. There should be a safety harbor again for temporary employer implemented workplace policies as well as we go through this transition period. And then there's also the issue of exposure liability. This is perhaps probably the largest area of concern for the overall business community. It includes multiple types of claims that could be brought against businesses that have been designated as essential, for one, or as a large swath of the remaining businesses community around the country start reopening gradually. The core component of this claim, or these claims, is that customers, employees, a patient, a member of the public was exposed to the virus in a business or as a result of a business's particular actions, or maybe even more importantly, their failure to act to protect people from getting sick. Now, these legal theories underlying these claims may range from simple negligence to strict liability of public nuisance. The threat of these exposure-related lawsuits may deter some businesses from reopening even after it is determined that they could do so safely and operate following the guidance of appropriate health officials. Policymakers should begin taking a look at, if they haven't already, to reform to reforms contained in prior economically wide federal legal reform laws, such as the Y2K Act, for guidance. Other areas of concern for liability are with product liability. For example, with makers of certain products, devices, and equipment to either protect or treat or to test for the virus may be subject to may not be sufficient protection. Liability, medical liability. There is increased concern that claims against healthcare providers and facilities caring for COVID-19 patients. And then you've got securities litigation that's already been filed. Class actions have already been filed against businesses such as the cruise line industry and pharmaceutical sector based on stock price drops resulting from the impact of the virus, and claims that companies should have been warning investors about the potential that they could have happened. And then lastly, support for businesses and individuals. The federal government has taken unprecedented steps to support employers and individuals during this current shutdown. These programs will need to be modified and to some extent extended and targeted to assist those businesses and individuals who will remain under distress during a phased or gradual reopening. For example, businesses that depend on high density gatherings or travel, such as entertainment venues, restaurants, bars, companies that host meetings and events, and many other businesses that only profit when they achieve the type of occupancy and density that is not possible during a social distancing policy. During this period where occupancy and gatherings are numerically restricted, these businesses should be provided a bridge or bridge assistance to enable them to remain vulnerable or viable. And then lastly, for individuals who are delayed in returning to work. Until there is a widely available vaccine, or at the very least, a widely available effective treatment for those who don't become sick, not everyone will be able to resume normal work activities. High-risk populations will need to engage in social distancing or even remain at home entirely or for at least a much longer period of time. And individuals, including independent contractors, who must stay home because of their risk profile, will need ongoing financial assistance if they cannot work remotely. This may require an extension of regular unemployment insurance or the creation of a new high-risk unemployment insurance system. So there are a lot of questions. We don't have all the answers, again, as I mentioned a moment ago, but our purpose with this is to kind of begin the process of having these serious discussions within the business community and advising congressional leaders as they start looking at how they reopen and what are the policies that are going to impact the businesses and their employees going forward as well. And that's what we are working on. Our legislative agenda will largely focus on these challenges that businesses are facing and the regulatory and liability and legal ramifications going forward as well. So Matt, thank you again for the opportunity to join you today, and I'll stop there and turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Moore, and thanks, Dr. Lowe. And now we have an opportunity to get to some of the questions for our members here. Moore, here's one for you. I know that a lot of times innovation is born out of crisis, and so I'm curious to see kind of what you're hearing from members that you work with across the country, if any new business lines or new jobs and lines of work are starting to crop up now over the last couple of weeks.
It's a great question, Matt. And while I personally haven't heard of any, they're going to happen. Business people are resilient. Business will rebound. It may take longer, as Dr. Lowe said, for our economy to fully rebound. But we're resilient people. Our economy is resilient, and this is going to generate a lot of new business ventures and opportunities for people that are far more creative than I am, and try to help businesses prepare for future, hopefully not pandemics, but future economically wide and health conditions as we're currently going through. So none specifically, but I think there will certainly be a lot of new businesses developed, created, and which is also going to require new regulations on how people maybe better telework. I think businesses probably have identified that maybe this isn't a bad way of operating, that we can adapt, we can do it successfully, but there will also be some kind of requirements and how better to protect employees and so forth as well in this environment. So,
Dr. Lowe, one question for you. You had talked about the importance of businesses diversifying their supply chain, and having different countries that they're working with. Are you starting to see others that are opening up now, or do you kind of have an outlook of where you think that's going to occur first?
So I have been paying attention to a lot of the Chinese news. I'm originally from Taiwan, so I do read Chinese. So I think that there are business are starting back up, as they try to resume the economic activities, but they are still going fairly slow. And for manufacturing, it can probably resume faster, but how strong your supply chain is really defined by the weakest link. So if certain country may work, but if some other part of the link is not working, then it's still not it's not going to work out for the downstream manufacturing. So I don't really follow news globally. I saw some, but I can still see some business struggling, just because not the entire supply chain is recovered.
Okay, great. And this is really for both of you guys, so I'll start with you, Moore. What are some of the industries and the sectors that you think will come back quicker than others as we start to come back to work?
I think it's, I kind of mentioned a moment ago, kind of the more populated cities and others are going to be a little bit of a slower, gradual phase in. I know here in Georgia, the governor has reopened some businesses to come back as early as this Friday, and others like restaurants as early as next week. Obviously, observing social distancing and other health guidelines to maintain their businesses in a safe manner. The travel industry is going to be impacted for a very long time. So I would dare to say that's not going to be one of the first ones coming back. I think everybody's going to want to kind of get back sooner to their normal of eating out and doing the various entertainment things. I think those a little bit slower, but I think there will be the industries, the larger ones that are maybe able to social distance, continue to do their work that doesn't rely on some of the smaller businesses, maybe in that case, to help. Maybe some of those that are kind of a little bit more gradual, but I think it'll largely be geographic as well. There are a lot of states, a lot of communities, a lot of counties that have very few to any patients that have been confirmed COVID or coronavirus patients. So some of those communities will open up a little bit easier, and you've got a number of states that are looking at doing so again early as this week with the gradual phase in of certain industries or businesses. Again, restaurants being kind of at the top of the list. I don't know if you're going to have bars and some of those where people are gathering much closer together opening up quicker, but those that you can continue to easily social distance, I think those will open up a little bit quicker.
Okay. Dr. Lowe, do you have anything to add on that?
I think I briefly touched on that. I think that sectors that are rely on data centric services, they have been doing well and they will continue to be. And I will assume that when other businesses are opening up their operation and see the need of incorporating that kind of technology, that will contribute to further growth in those sectors. So I think that that's mainly the sector that I would see will flourish from this crisis.
Okay, great.
Let me also add.
Yeah,
I'll
sure.
also add one more thing. So I'm in the education sector. So education sector is really not impacted as much, as the other sector, because we have been adopting this online instruction or remote learning, distance learning technology for quite a while. So education sector is probably not impacted much. And I think that as more and more teachers and students are realizing the convenience of, distance learning technology, I think there can still be winner and losers, in this game. But overall speaking, being able to adapt to this new form of learning and instruction, that could, push the sector up too.
Okay. And similarly on the education front, I know more that you had talked about kind of the liabilities for employers. We had a question about, do we think that those similar liabilities are going to apply when public schools, I mean, most of them, at least I know in Florida, they are closed, for this school year, planning on reopening in August. I mean, did those sort of liability concerns apply for public education as well?
I would expect they do. I mean, certainly for the private schools, but for public schools, there will be guidelines, I suspect, put in place. I mean, they're public schools, but I think the more liabilities will fall on some of the same business type of liabilities will fall on the private schools.
Gotcha. And I think one thing that we're hearing too. I mean, the schools also have the benefit of having, now that they know they're closed, they have a longer lead time to prepare for a lot of it, and they've got sort of a hard start date in place. Whereas you're looking at businesses that are trying to, get back as quick as they can to help pay employees and to help, keep their businesses alive. So I think that's kind of the rolling deadline of that is a little bit different on the business side than it is on the education side.
And maybe even, Matt, going back to a question you asked earlier about this creating a wave of potential new business ventures in a sense. And I think Dr. Lowe is right. I mean, I think schools, our son does go to a private school, and they've been prepared for and have done homes. They're all issued laptops, and they do periodic tech days where they work from home instead of going into the school building. And it was kind of set up in the event a school had to shut down for a certain reason. They had the capability and technological ability to do so. So it was a very easy transition to him. It just turned out that he ended up doing it every day now for the rest of the school year. But I think education, I think that is a big opportunity, maybe more educational opportunities, online learning might be something you see.
Great. And Dr. Lowe, when you had talked about the unemployment numbers earlier and sort of the spike that we've seen in Jacksonville and Florida and across the country, and also mentioned that doesn't really take into effect workers that have been furloughed or have a reduction in hours, how do we get a sense as to really how many people are in need of assistance and what the real economic impact is of the job losses during COVID-19?
Yeah, it's really I don't really have all the data, but something I would just usually look at a media report on how many people file for unemployment insurance, the claim. So to get a sense, I think that usually people, if people when they lose a job, and they can probably get back on try to find another one. And if they're actively looking for a job, maybe they get a chance to get another job, and they may not necessarily file for unemployment insurance right away, because maybe next week he's gonna get another job, right? Why bother doing that? But I think that because of this crisis, is making people realize that it's not only that the business they have been working for, but the entire sector is slowing down. This entire sector is closing down. And so they know that they can foresee that there's a longer period of time they're going to be out of work. So they will tend to file for an unemployment insurance claim more likely than in the past. So, but that's really the only statistics I have in terms of gauging, the real impact on this.
Okay. One question that we've had, Jacksonville is a very philanthropic community. There's a lot of nonprofit presence here. And one of our members was curious if either of you had any insight as to what the impact has been on the nonprofit sector over the last couple of weeks, and kind of what you might see going forward on that.
Well, I can speak from the perspective of a lot of local chambers. For one, local chambers, trade associations, others are 501c6 organizations. I suspect the JAX chamber is one as well. And this, 501c6s were left out of the legislation, the CARES Act legislation, and not eligible for the Paycheck Protection Loan Program. There's been questions as to the eligibility of those organizations, trade associations, being even eligible for the EIDL loans or the EIDL grants. So because of that funding that was set up by Congress to help small businesses through this economically challenging time, those have been left out. So those chambers and other trade associations and nonprofits are making very difficult decisions daily, and many have laid off or furloughed employees. Some have closed their doors, and the executive or somebody else might be working on a voluntary basis because while the chamber or that trade association may not be open today, they still have members that rely on them for as much information as they can to help them get through this. And so I would just say from a broader perspective, they've been hit very hard. There are those out there that have been the benefactors of people's generosity, financial generosity, and volunteer time to help those in need, like the homeless or those food banks and stuff like that. They're still hit hard financially themselves, but I think they're getting a lot of donations, but not to say they're getting a lot. Those are still viable groups that need that assistance as well. So I say some are doing okay, but others are struggling.
Okay. And I think a little bit along those same lines, as it relates somewhat to nonprofits, there's obviously been a significant government investment in the Paycheck Protection Plan, a lot of the other loans, and a lot of the stimulus efforts. What do you think will happen with, does that affect government funding of social programs going forward?
Well,
Go ahead, Dr. Lowe.
go ahead, more.
I was just going to say, I mean, we are at the Chamber fighting very hard for these nonprofit organizations, well beyond 501c6s, to be included in the next bill Congress drafts, the Phase 4 bill. You also have a lot of other members of Congress who are going to be pushing for other organizations, and those may include some of these social type programs and businesses and stuff as well. So we will see. It will be very difficult. The momentum around including 501c6s and other C organizations to make sure they're included, the momentum is very strong. But there's also the reality that everybody's going to want a piece of the pie, and not every member of Congress is going to agree to each other's side of those initiatives, whether it's a chamber or a labor union or a social organization. You never know, and so it'll be difficult to get through, but we'll continue to work on it. But yeah, those are going to be impacted as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they're definitely going to have some impact on the other social programs, but I would just maybe offer two other aspects to it. One is I think that these it is really about trade-off. If we don't have the government relief funding, and then what are we be looking at? We'll be looking at a much worse economic recession. And then so by having this economic relief, and we'll be able to, through multiplier effect. So if you put down like $2 trillion of aid, pump that into the economy, and through multiplier effect, if you're giving that to the right person, if they're really, spending money on consumption out of those relief funds, and hopefully through multiplier effect, a lot of them will come back in terms of tax revenues, in terms of other, corporate profit, or income taxes, and then that will still allow you to support the social program, not as strongly as before. But if you think about the counterfactual, have we not done this? That would have been much lower. So having the relief fund is probably a good idea. Although I think we could probably be more discretionary in terms of who are getting them. If you're giving money to people who are not going to spend, just going to save that in the bank, then you're not going to have that multiplier effect, and so the impact of this relief will be very minimal. But if you're giving that to the right person, then that hopefully that will have a much better, that will achieve much better outcome. And the other thing is, I think that through this relief, especially in terms of the direct cash payment to individuals, if that really worked out, and that will open a lot of people's eye, who may usually be objective to social programs, they will realize that this could be a way to prop up an economy or to facilitate economic growth. And so I don't know whether that's going to create or how much of a shift in mentality that's going to create, but that could be a positive impact on the social programs.
That's great. We're kind of wrapping her up here. I think I have time for probably one or two more questions. One that we've gotten, curious, probably start with you with more on this one. As businesses, come back and start to reopen, and not just in the early phases, I think this is kind of a more long-term projections question that we had from one of our members. Do we think that the businesses are going to come back to a similar scale you know, and maybe for Dr. Lowe too, a year and a half down the road? Or do you think it's going to be, you know, a smaller scale to begin with? You know, what are we looking at in the next couple of years? Do we think it's businesses are going to be at the same level, or are they going to be scaled back some?
I wish I had the answer, Matt. I really don't know. You know, it's difficult to see. We're going to have high unemployment, obviously, I think, through the rest of this year. There's the administration and others project that if we can indeed bend the curve, which I think a majority of states and as a nation we're doing, but is it going to be enough to we can actually have a real solid fourth quarter economically? And I think if we do, then that might help with first and second quarters of next year and businesses getting a little bit more back up to full speed. But I think a lot of it will factor on people's psyche and is there a vaccine or a viable treatment if you were to get sick? I think it's just that comfortability of people to actually get back out, to spend money, to shop as they used to, and businesses to run and operate safely for themselves and their employees, and what that means that they can get out to do to whether or not it's going to look like in the next year or two.
Yeah, I completely agree with Moore. I think that before you have a vaccine or effective, widely available effective treatments, and there's just too much uncertainty. You know, for example, when we are talking about reopening the economy now, you know, or in May, or in the very near future, you know, before you have those solution, and we don't know what's going to happen. A lot of people are you know, predicting that there's going to be a second wave of infections. You know, a lot of the news in China or actually in other countries are also confirming that real possibility. So if you reopen the economy and then people are not use cautions, you know, just go out and full-blown social activities, and then creating a resurgence of the cases, and then our economy will have to reclose. You know, what I really don't want to see is that our economy will reopen and then reclose and reopen again, reclose again. And you know, if you get our economy into that start and stop rhythm, and the hurt is going to last much longer, and economy would not be able to get back to the level we was for a long, long time. I mean, know that I added another long. So,
well, great. Well, listen, we have run up on the end of the hour. Thank you very much, Moore Hallmark from the U.S. Chamber, Dr. Albert Lowe from the Coggin College of Business at UNF. Just want to let everyone know we are planning 2 more webinars for next week. The first, we are planning to have a representative from the SBA talk about some of the renewed funding that we're hopefully going to see, that which Moore mentioned earlier, that was expected to be voted on through the House today. We're, you know, hopeful that that will go through, and then we'll have someone from the SBA here on Tuesday to talk about that. And then we'll also focus on a little bit more on reopening with some tips for employers to look at sort of, you know, insurance liabilities and other things as it relates to, you know, bringing people back and bringing people back safely. So again, thank you again, Moore. Thank you, Dr. Lowe, and thank you everyone for being here today.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.